something that happened on a first date that made you decide against a second date? So I decided to dip my toes back into the dating pool after what felt like an eternity of solitude. I figured, why not try my luck on one of those dating apps? I mean, everyone and their grandma's on them these days, right? I swipe right, she swipes right, and boom, we match. Her name's Emily, and she's got this vibrant smile that seems genuine even through the screen. We hit it off pretty well, exchanging messages that range from light banter to surprisingly deep conversations for a couple of strangers who just met on an app. A few hours into our virtual chat, she invites me over to her place. Now, normally I'd be cautious, but she seemed nice enough, and maybe I was feeling a bit spontaneous. Plus, what's the worst that could happen, right? Famous last words, I know. I pull up to her house, a cozy little suburban number with a neat lawn and flower beds that suggest someone cares about appearances. Emily greets me at the door, just as charming in person as she was in our texts. She's got this warm, approachable vibe, like someone you could easily spend hours talking to about nothing and everything. As I step inside, I quickly realize this night is going to be anything but ordinary. We walk into the living room, and there's her mom, slumped at the dining table. She's a mess, clearly mixing painkillers with alcohol. She's mumbling incoherently, her head bobbing as if she's struggling to stay conscious. Every few minutes, she snaps out of her stupor to ask me the most bizarre questions, like if I believe in alien abductions or if I've ever tried ayahuasca. It's both sad and surreal. Emily tries to play it off like it's no big deal, guiding me to the kitchen where we sit down at the table. She starts making some small talk, but it's hard to ignore the chaos swirling around us. Just when I think it couldn't get weirder, her sister barges in with her boyfriend. They're both visibly drunk, and they're in the middle of a screaming match that sounds like it's been brewing for hours. Every insult they hurl at each other feels like it could be the final straw that sends them over the edge. Emily looks embarrassed, shooting me apologetic glances as she tries to keep the conversation between us flowing. It's awkward, to say the least. Here we are, trying to have a normal first date, while her family's dysfunction is on full display. At one point, her sister throws a half-empty beer can at her boyfriend, missing him by a mile, but hitting the wall with a loud thunk. Her boyfriend retaliates by shouting something unintelligible and storming out of the room. Meanwhile, her mom's still in her own world, occasionally piping up with random slurred comments. It's a madhouse, and I'm smack dab in the middle of it. As we're sitting there amidst the chaos, I start to realize that Emily is the most normal person in this whole mess. Her mom is a wreck, her sister is a hothead, and her sister's boyfriend is no better. But Emily? She's composed, almost serene, despite the storm around her. She starts talking more about her life, her 9-year-old daughter who lives in another state, and how she's never had custody. She's clearly upset about it, venting about how unfair the system is and how it's always stacked against mothers. Now, I've lived in Colorado my whole life, and I've never seen it like that. Every divorced dad I've known barely gets weekends, let alone full custody, unless the mom's completely out of the picture. I didn't tell Emily that, though. It felt like pouring salt in an open wound. Instead, I just listened. She told me how hard it was, not being able to see her daughter as often as she wanted, how she felt like she was missing out on so much. I could see the pain in her eyes, the way her voice cracked when she talked about her little girl. It was heartbreaking. Despite the insanity happening around us, this moment felt real and raw. Emily's mom, meanwhile, continued to spiral. At one point, she slumped forward, her face almost hitting the table before she jerked awake again. "Do you believe in love at first sight?" She slurred at me, her eyes struggling to focus. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I just nodded politely. Emily shot me an apologetic look, and I could see the weariness in her eyes. This was her life, day in and day out. The sister, who I learned was named Kara, had calmed down a bit, though her boyfriend had disappeared somewhere in the house, probably to cool off. Kara sat down with us, her face flushed from anger and alcohol. She muttered something about how she was sick of this place and needed to get out. Emily tried to console her, but it was like talking to a wall. I felt a strange mix of pity and admiration for Emily. Here she was, stuck in the middle of this madhouse, yet she managed to stay kind and grounded. She was doing her best to make a life for herself, despite the odds. And for some reason, she chose to invite me, a stranger, into this chaos. Maybe she needed an escape, someone to talk to who wasn't part of the mess. Or maybe she saw something in me that made her think I could handle it. Either way, I was here now, and I wasn't about to bail. As the night went on, things started to quiet down a bit. Kara and her boyfriend had retreated to a corner of the house, their voices now just a dull murmur. Emily's mom had finally dozed off, her head resting on the table, snoring soft. Emily and I moved to the living room, finding a spot on the couch where we could talk without the constant interruptions. We talked about everything, our hopes, our fears, our favorite childhood memories. Emily told me about her daughter's love for painting and how she sent her drawings every week. I shared stories about growing up in Colorado, the adventures I had with my friends, and how I ended up in my current job. It felt like we were the only two people in the world, wrapped up in our own little bubble. At one point, Emily leaned back and sighed. "I'm sorry about all this," she said, gesturing vaguely towards the rest of the house. "I know it's a lot." "It's all right," I said, smiling. "Everyone's got their own kind of crazy. Yours just happens to be a bit more lively." She laughed, a genuine hearty laugh that lit up her face. "Yeah, you could say that." As the night wore on, I found myself drawn to Emily in a way I hadn't expected. Despite the madness around her, she was strong, resilient, and full of life. She wasn't perfect, but who is? She had her struggles, her pain, but she also had a big heart and a fierce love for her daughter. And that, I realized, was something worth sticking around for. Eventually, it was time for me to head out. Emily walked me to the door, and as we stood on her porch, she asked, "So, do you think we could do this again sometime?" I took a deep breath. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, but I had to be honest. "Emily, I'm sorry to be blunt, but tonight I was very uncomfortable, and I don't think we'll align." Her face fell, and then to my surprise, she started to get angry. "Everyone has a crazy mom," she snapped. "It's normal. Drunk people fight. It's what they do. You sound like CPS, for crying out loud." I tried to explain, but she cut me off. "You're a weirdo," she said, her voice rising. "You should have disclosed your medical condition if you're so sensitive to a little chaos." She hurled insult after insult at me, her words growing more and more vicious. I was stunned. Here I thought I was being respectful by being honest, but she was taking it as a personal attack. "Emily, I didn't need to be like that," I said, trying to keep my cool. "But you straight up told me to come to your house with your mom, drunk sister, and her boyfriend without any warning. It was overwhelming." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "Well, if you can't handle a little family drama, then maybe you're not as strong as I thought." I could see there was no reasoning. This was a side of Emily I hadn't seen before, and it was clear she wasn't ready to hear anything that didn't align with her view of normal. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, stepping off the porch. "I wish you all the best." As I walked to my car, she continued to shout insults after me, calling me everything from a coward to a loser. I drove home in a daze, replaying the night's events in my head. It was like I had stepped into an alternate reality, where madness was the norm, and I was the odd one out for not embracing it. Once I got home, I collapsed onto my couch, the silence of my apartment a stark contrast to the chaos I had just left. I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and disappointment. I had hoped for a connection, a spark, something to reignite my faith in dating. Instead, I got a front row seat to a dysfunctional family's meltdown. Over the next few days, Emily sent me a barrage of angry texts. At first, I tried to respond diplomatically, but it quickly became clear that nothing I said would change her mind. Eventually, I stopped replying altogether, blocking her number to save my sanity. In the end, I realized that dating, like everything else in life, is a gamble. Sometimes you hit the jackpot, and sometimes you end up with a lesson learned the hard way. Emily's family was a stark reminder that everyone's normal is different, and not all of them are compatible. So here I am, back on the apps, swiping left and right, hoping the next match will be a bit more stable. Who knows what the future holds, but one thing's for sure. I'm going to be a lot more cautious about accepting invitations to someone's house on the first date. It's funny though. As bizarre as that night was, it did teach me something valuable. Always trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. And no matter how desperate you are for a connection, never settle for someone who makes you feel anything less than comfortable and respected.